Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Dr. Heldman. Welcome back to Tech Talk Education. In this video, I'm starting a new series where we're going to begin talking about a very interesting topic that you'll run into, especially if you're studying for the Linux Plus, CompTIA Linux Plus certification exams. There is this idea of what's called high performance computing, HPC, and the notion is that we can put a bunch of servers together and we can connect them in such a way that they can do a job together, they can do calculations or whatever, run code, and it makes it much more faster than a single computer could do. This is called a cluster, Linux cluster. It's everywhere, so this is a very, very popular topic. And surprisingly, what we can do is we can invent a virtualized Linux cluster server environment using Oracle VirtualBox and some other tools. So that's what this video series is going to be about. In this video, we're going to get pfSense installed and we'll get the cluster nodes installed as well. I'll show you how to do one and then you can just rinse and repeat on the others. And after that, we'll start doing some work in terms of how we go about using a Linux cluster server environment for production purposes. So let's get started. This should be very educational, informing. I want to let you know that you may get frustrated when you're trying to accomplish certain things as we go along here. You are deep into waist high technology now, and so there might be a time or two when you're having to do some research and figure out what the heck is going on. But it's a lot of fun. I think you'll learn a lot. Let's get started. All right then, so in front of you on your screen, you should see a document. I went out to a really great website called SmartDraw, and I drew up this little document. So the basic layout of this thing, the architecture as it were, is that I have a home Wi-Fi router, and it's feeding my house via Wi-Fi signals as well as Ethernet. I'm connected via Ethernet to this router, to my computer. I do have a regular PC tower, and then I'm running Windows 11 on the tower. On Windows 11 now I've installed Oracle VirtualBox. I love this product. And then inside Oracle VirtualBox, what we're going to do is we're going to create a cloud, if you will, if you can think about it that way. The idea is that first we will have a pfSense router. Now I've got intrusion detection system and intrusion prevention system, IDS and IPS, noted here. We'll get to that in later videos. In addition to that, what I think we're going to do is we're going to do Debian 12. The point here is that you want to pick something. I was after something that was a very light footprint, light and crispy and airy. I didn't have to worry about stomping all over everything because the GUI was too big or it took too much time doing other sorts of tasks. And indeed, in a regular Linux cluster environment, you wouldn't even have a GUI. You would be doing everything from the command line, because the point with these clusters is we want to do processing much more quickly than we can do if we were just on a single computer. Anyway, I like working with GUIs, and so I think that Debian 12 is going to be the best choice for us because it is light, it's crispy. I'm going to use a desktop environment. It's called a DE, a desktop environment out there called XFCE, X-ray, Foxtrot, Charlie, Echo. And it's very light. It's pretty nice, actually. I like it a lot. And then we will have 3 of these. So you can see that we're going to have coming out of the router. So the main connection between my computer here is to the router, the pfSense router, and then all of these cluster nodes, they're called nodes, are behind this router. So in order to get out the door to go to the web or whatever, they have to go to the router, then they have to go through my machine to the Wi-Fi router to get out to the web. So that's the flow. And we're going to have 3 nodes. We're going to have a node called a master node. We're going to have a node called compute node 1. And we're going to have a node called compute node 2. Now, there are ways to automate this procedure, and we'll get into that later on in a later movie, but the point here is that we're going to create all this on our own so that we can find out how exactly this goes together and how it works. Now, the only thing I'm not showing you is that in a typical high-performance computing, it's called HPC, environment like this, where you have a bunch of Linux servers that are all connected together in a cluster environment, typically they have some sort of a smart backbone on them known as fiber channel. They're all connected through fiber optic cabling. That's a whole nother beast. It's expensive. I can't do that because I don't have any of that equipment. But you should be aware that if you really got interested in this and you wanted to get into high performance cluster computing, you would likely be dealing with fiber optic cabling and fiber channel backbones, and that whole area is just completely very big, very large, a lot to know about it. And we're not going to go there, but we are going to get into the point where you can practically create this cluster node, this cluster environment. Okay, so now the place to get pfSense, I've already downloaded it, but I want to show you how you get it. So I just Googled for pfSense download, and I'm taken to this website, pfSense.org download. What we're going to get is what's called the pfSense Community Edition, the CE edition of this software. So you click that, you'll click the download button. You want to get the AMD 8664 version of this software and download it to a folder. Let's talk real quickly about this company, Netgate, that manages and releases this software. A very, very good company. I'm really impressed with these guys. And so they sell a lot of products. So they're in the business of selling routing products. And you can see that you can get a bunch of different things here. And so you could buy a personal Netgate router if that's something that you wanted. You can go up in size based upon their capabilities. And you can even get into the enterprise class. Sometimes when you buy a switch or something like that, it can plug into a 10 gig port on a switch, and you can use these devices here. So they're making all that. They're doing a great job. All we really want right now is the pfSense CE software. So you go to pfSense.org/download, and then you will download this software. And here's what it looks like once you've downloaded it. So it's going to come down as what's called a GZ, a GNU zip file. I think that now Windows 11 can talk to a GZ. I don't know for sure. But if I right-click this and I select Show More Actions, I like 7-zip a great deal, and so I just extracted it using 7-zip, which is a free software product you can install on your computer. And what that will do is it knows how to unzip a GNU zip file. And so once you're done with that, you have this guy here. Now this is an ISO file, which means that we have to go through a full-on installation process once we're inside VirtualBox. So that's the next order of duty. Let's go ahead and get this installed. Okay, I have Oracle VirtualBox in front of me. You can go out to virtualbox.org and download that tool. And I'm on the latest and greatest. If I go here under Help About VirtualBox, I'm using 7.1.6 release whatever, and so this is pretty new. Now the one thing I do want to caution you about is when you're downloading VirtualBox and installing it for the first time, there's actually two pieces of software. The first one is the VirtualBox environment itself. The second one is what they call guest editions, and you need to download first this thing and then install it, then download and install the guest edition so that you can use things like CD-ROMs, USBs, and stuff like that. So it's actually a two-part install. I've done several movies on how you do this, but I assume that you know how to get VirtualBox running now. So I'm going to close this. Now you can also see that you can create groups. So I have a lot of groups set up here, and I was practicing this whole Linux cluster thing, so I even have a group named Linux Cluster Practice. We're basically going to duplicate this group on our own. So the first thing we do is click the blue wheel here, and we say that we're going to install a pfSense router. Now because I have multiple editions of this thing running on my computer here, I'm going to create a brand new setup here, and I want to name it such that I know what it is I'm looking at. So I'm going to say for Linux cluster environment. I'm going to be pretty careful about wording this in such a way that I understand what's happening here, so that when I go in I'm not confused about what I'm looking at. I'm going to put this in a new VirtualBox VM. You can see that I created one here already. I'm going to create a brand new one, so I will click here and create a new folder. I'm going to call this pfSense 4, and in fact what I might do is I might just go ahead and create a folder called Linux Cluster Server Class, and then inside that folder I'm going to come in here and put pfSense like so, and then I will use this folder, so I'll come down and say select folder. That will allow me to use this particular folder for this particular VM. I'm trying to be very, very careful about keeping everything isolated so that I recognize it when I go in of a day and I want to begin working on this. Also, to keep things from getting in the way of one another, I really like separating things like this. Now, so I'm going to go out and grab the ISO image here. So I click this down arrow, I go to Other. I keep everything in an area called Software, and I have, you can see I've got a bunch of software that I've downloaded. Here's my pfSense. I was showing you this earlier. I don't need to have 3 or 4 copies of the ISO download because I can just recreate the machines using a single ISO. That's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to double click this guy to get it to install. You can see here that it converts to subtype is Oracle Linux, and it's Oracle Linux 64-bit. Why is that? Well, because we're using Oracle VirtualBox, and pfSense actually uses BSD Unix, but this is fine because it actually appears for us just fine. So I'm going to let it default to this. I'm going to go in unattended install. I'm not going to do. I'm going to go to hardware, and you can basically go with what's recommended by VirtualBox for all of these machines, including the machine node, the master node, the compute node 1 and 2. All of them can be the same. I'm going to jack everything up to 2 CPUs so it's a little bit quicker. And then the hard drive space, which is 20 gig, is going to be fine for all of them. So you can just leave that alone as well. So I'll click Finish. That makes it a little bit easier. And let's see, this showed up in Linux Cluster Practice. I'll take that out of there. I might have to practice dropping that out of there later and putting it into another group. I will confess to you that one of the things that I found a little bit difficult to work with is when you start grouping things together like this, it can get a little gnarly. You have to kind of play around with it to get it to put into a separate group. I don't want to take up video time to do that. Okay, next thing you do is you go into the gear here, and there are some things that we want to set. Now I'm going to set bidirectional, and the only reason I do bidirectional shared clipboard and drag is so I can drag and drop files around. What you're going to find once we get into the actual Debian 12 stuff is that it doesn't work. We have to enable it. So that was really a frustration point for me because I couldn't get it to drag and drop or copy and paste stuff even though bidirectional had been enabled. So we're going to have to run down a little rabbit trail to do that. Now under the System tab here, go to Processor. I'm going to enable this nested VT. What that means is, if possible, I'm going to use the motherboard's hardware to speed up this processing. So if I can enable it, I do, and especially if I don't get an error warning, which will show up right here, like right down where it says TPM, you might get an error warning. Let's see if this is all selected, so I don't need to select it right now, but it would show up with a little triangle here. That means it won't take that setting, but in this case I'm good. I'm not getting any errors here at all. I'm going to uncheck floppy, move hard disk up in the boot order, move optical up in the second boot order. I'm going to come down here, display I don't care about, it's fine, nothing here to worry about. Now if you did happen to run into a kernel panic or similar, something like that, where things aren't playing very well in the sandbox for you, one of the things I would look at is maybe jacking this video memory up to say 128 or 64 maybe even, something like that. But honestly, pfSense is fine with the level that it has. But I'll set it for 64 just so you can see what I'm talking about. There's no need to enable 3D acceleration, but you can see here that I do get this invalid settings. And so whenever you check something and you get that, you probably want to take a look at what it is you're doing, why that's not going to work. Here's our IDE and SATA controllers. They've got all the software they need to do the work they're going to do. What this is telling you here is that you have a virtual CD loaded, and that's the Netgate installer ISO. And then what we're going to do is create this pfSense for Linux cluster environment. It's called a virtual disk, VDI virtual disk image. Also, you don't need to enable pfSense on audio because there's no audio to really listen to. It's not taking up a lot of room, but if I know I'm never going to use it, I just disable it because it's one less thing to have in the loop. And network adapter is going to be interesting for us from a pfSense perspective, not so much from the actual cluster nodes themselves. Now in this case we have two adapters. So the first adapter here is called NAT, and this is what is allowing pfSense to go out the door through my machine to my home router to the web. We're using what's called network address translation. It stands for NAT. Very cool topic, very interesting subject. But we need a second adapter enabled, and so I'm going to enable this adapter, and I'm going to put it into a group that is just isolated to my little cluster environment. I'm going to call that internal network, and I'm going to name it cluster server. You could say cluster environment, whatever. It's just a meaningful name that you are assigning to your internal network, and all of our cluster nodes are going to be in cluster server. They're not going to have any other network connection apart from cluster server. I don't care about the serial ports at all. USB is enabled. We will wind up using that at some point for something different, but we'll get to that later in a later video. I could set up shared folders. This is a way that you could share everything out from your hard drive so that you could copy it over to the different VMs. We probably won't need that, so I'll leave it alone, and I'm not going to rearrange the VirtualBox order of stuff here. It's fine by me. So I click OK. Now the machine's ready to run. Now please remember that it is going to be what I'm trying to say is that we have an ISO file. We've got to go clear through the entire installation. So the idea is you download the software, click the blue gear here, create the machine, get all the settings correct by clicking the settings gear. Once you're done in setting it up, then you click the settings gear, and then we go to run the app. And what this is going to do is go out, look at the CD-ROM that we have virtualized out there. It's going to see that ISO file, and we're going to install this ISO. Now, we don't really need to get into pfSense at all because there's nothing there for us that we need to monitor. We could do things from the command line, but we really don't need to. What we're actually going to do is we're actually going to use the web interface to do the majority of work. I'm going to minimize this for a minute so that you can see just this window here. This is called a TUI. I didn't know that until I was teaching a class the other day. And the idea behind a TUI, it's not a GUI, so your mouse isn't going to work here. What it's looking for you to do is hit your enter keys or your tab keys to move around inside the window. So this is a very old way of doing things. It's kind of cool though because it brings color, and some good fonts to you, and it allows them to do a lot more explaining. So I'm going to run through this TUI. So you can see that it's highlighted on accept and it's blue, and what it's asking is if you accept this, go ahead and hit the enter key. So I'll hit enter. Now it wants to say it's going to install pfSense. I don't need a rescue shell, so I'm just going to install. That's the default. I'll hit enter. It says it's going to set up the network to continue the installation, and enter. Now it's showing you two adapters here. You've got to get used to this because pfSense works this way, and in fact if you have labs that have different environments inside them, VLANs or whatever, you might have multiple adapters. Now in this case, the default is the adapters names are Echo Mic 0, EM0, and Echo Mic 1. Echo Mic 0, EM0 is going to be the adapter that handles your wide area network, the WAN network, and then Echo Mic 1 is going to handle the LAN network, and it gave each of these guys a MAC address. So that's totally cool. So we just hit OK to say, yep, that's what we want to do. Continue, proceed with installation. Yes, hit enter. And it's going to take a minute. Now it wants to know if we want to assign a LAN address, and we do. This is one time now where you need to change the selection, because if you look up here it says do not assign the LAN interface. I do want to assign the LAN interface, so I'll hit my my arrow key, my down arrow, to make sure that I have EM1 highlighted, because we are going to set up that LAN network, and then I hit enter to select OK. OK to proceed with installation. And then so it's gonna, you can see that it's assigned the labels here. So LAN is Echo Mic 1, WAN is Echo Mic 0. That's exactly what we're looking for. We like that a lot, so I'll hit enter. And what it's going to do now is begin to go through some more of this installation process. Some of this might take a minute. Now this is saying we don't have an active pfSense Plus subscription. We do not. And we're going to install the Community Edition. Perfect. We like that a lot. We could purchase this if we wanted to. There's really no need to, since we're just experimenting around with it. And it says proceed with installation. Okay, I'll do that. Let's do that. Notice here that you could use like different file system setups. You could use GPT if you wanted to. It's an advanced Linux thing. We don't care about that right now. We're just going to let it proceed and do what it does. So we hit enter. We're not going to stripe this. We are going to stripe it, but we're not striping with parity, so there's no redundancy here, which would be fine if we were working, when we're working by ourselves here. But if we were in a production environment, we would likely do a RAID 5 array here. Anyway, let's go. And then finally it says, select the disks. Okay, that looks good. The 20 gig VirtualBox hard disk looks good to me. And are you sure you want to destroy the current contents of the following disk? Could be scary. Don't let it be scary. All it's saying is, look, you've given me a 20 gig space out here, and I want to go ahead and format that. It's fine by us. It's not going to format our entire machine. Okay. Now it says, what version of pfSense CE do you want to install? We always want to install the stable version. We do not want to install the deprecated version unless we're trying to troubleshoot a problem of some kind, and we don't want the latest and greatest that could be unstable. So this is perfect. Hit OK. Alright, now you really shouldn't need to get into the menus at all, but you can see that at menu 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, if you entered your option number down here, you could go in and make a change if you wanted to. This is really good if you needed to reset the password. For the web shell, for example, reset web configurator password. I have used that before. You could restart to factory defaults or something like that if you wanted to, or assign interfaces. It does a beautiful job. I want to communicate to you that pfSense is a rock. It's very, very solid. Just trust it. Now the next thing we want to look at is we have a WAN circuit, a wide area network circuit here, and it has a label of Echo Mic 0. It has picked up an IP version 4 address off of my home router, and it's also picked up a DHCP or an IPv6 address from the home router. And you'll also notice here that we have a LAN network, local area network here, and the adapter name is Echo Mic 1. So this pfSense router currently has 2 adapters on it. You can have up to 8. 4 of them exist right in pfSense. 4 have to be added programmatically if you want to do something like that. And it's given us a standard address of 192.168.1.1. That's absolutely perfect. No problem there at all. Now, what we are going to do next, now that we've got this running, when you bring this up and you want to work with the lab of a day, this is going to be the first thing that you start. Do you start pfSense, make sure that it's running in the background, and then you go about doing your business for setting up the rest of the lab. So let's do that now. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to install one of our cluster nodes. This one's going to be called master node. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and get our cluster nodes downloaded and installed. We're just going to do one that will take us to the end of this movie, and then we'll pick up from there in the next movie. I chose Debian, the actual company here, Debian.org, because I did a little bit of research. What I was looking for was a Linux OS that had a GUI, a desktop environment. It's called a DE, but I didn't want it to be like really overwhelming. Like some of these, like Ubuntu and things like that, can get really big because they're designed for a regular user on a regular laptop or desktop. However, we are not. We're using this in a virtual environment, so we have to really manage our resources, and so I needed it to be pretty skinny. So I settled on Debian. I looked around with a bunch of them and experimented with a lot of them. If you were so inclined, you could download just a regular terminal-based installation, but if I'm being honest with you, I like the GUI. I like being able to get in there and see certain things. I love working with the terminal, but there are times when I really need to see something, and the GUI just affords me of that. Anyway, the other one you might consider, this is the Debian side of the house, so I'm accustomed to working with Debian because I use CompTIA Linux, which is a Debian uses Debian, and also Ubuntu uses Debian, and so forth, Linux Mint. But there is another one called a Red Hat distribution, and one you might consider there would be Fedora. I like Fedora a great deal, but ultimately I said, well, I'm comfortable with Debian, so I settled on this. But the main point is you pick one that's going to be really, really not take up a lot of room in terms of space or RAM. The GUI is going to be interesting to you. What GUI do you pick? So that's why I settled on Debian. So you go out to Debian.org, you hit the download button here, and then you get the ability to download it, and it too is an ISO. So let's see what's involved with that. Now I've already downloaded it. This is a relatively big file. It'll take a few minutes for you to download it, and then we'll go ahead and get that installed. So the next thing you'll see will be I'll have the VirtualBox Virtual Manager up and running, and we will install Debian as a compute node. So as promised, here's the VirtualBox Manager. You can see that I did get it out of the group that it was in. I put it in a new group. It's called YouTube Linux Cluster Service Videos. pfSense is running. You're going to want this to run every time you work with the lab. It's got to be the first thing that you bring up and start running. Next thing we're going to do is click the blue wheel again, and we're going to create our first operating system. So I'm going to say that this is Debian, and the current version of Debian is 12. So we'll say Debian 12 for, and you could get really ornate if you wanted to. You could say Linux cluster environment, and I'm going to put specifically down here that this is for the master node so that I know which is which. Now what it's going to do is show up in a label like this right here. So when it's not running, it'll show up in that label. You'll also see it in the properties pane for this particular VM. I'm going to grab a virtual machine. I'm going to tell it that I want to go into my Linux cluster server class, and I'm going to be very specific about this. So I'm going to say Debian 12 for master node. We're going to have 3 installations of this, so we need to be super careful about what it is that we're doing so we can track the names of everything. Otherwise you're going to get confused if you don't do it. So take the extra time, do the extra typing, make sure you understand what it is that you're doing. Now I'm going to go to software, Linux, wherever that's at, it's over here, and I'm looking for Debian. And I've already downloaded the installer. I downloaded on Valentine's Day. It's pretty big. It's a little over half a gig. And I'm going to grab this guy as my ISO. I'm going to skip unattended installation. What does that mean? Back in the day, I think this is a Microsoft invention. It might not be. I don't know. Back in the day, you could create a file. It was just a text file that the system could read, and so it knew the instructions to how to answer each question in the installation. It was called an unattend install, or unattend.txt, I think is what it was called. And so that idea has caught on, and the idea might be really interesting if you were spawning a bunch of these things, but in this case I'm not going to bother with it because it takes extra effort just to create the document for the unattended installation. You're just as well off to just sit there and go through the ISO installation process. Notice here that it landed on Debian 64. Perfect, that's exactly what we're dealing with. I'm going to go to hardware. I can keep the 2048. This is 2 gig of RAM. It's perfect. There's no problem with that. That's the default. I am going to jack this guy up to 2 CPUs. Master node could actually benefit with 4 CPUs, I think. Probably doesn't need much more RAM, but it might need a little bit more processing power. We could always come back and adjust this, so let's leave it at the 2 CPUs for now. And then on the hard disk, it defaults to 20 gig, totally fine. We're not going to do a whole lot with this. It's a very minimal installation, so we really don't care about that. So the process is a 3-part process. Blue gear, create the machine. Gold gear, create the settings for the machine. That's the next step for us. Advanced, I'm going to enable bidirectional in both of these areas. Keeping in mind it doesn't work when I have to enable it, but that was actually an interesting process. Processor, I'm going to enable both PAENX and nested VT. Try to get as much hardware virtualization as I can out of the system. I'm going to uncheck floppy, bring hard disk to the top boot order, and optical next. Come down here to display. I might give this 64 meg of display memory. You don't need a whole lot. This thing is actually really pretty tiny. It's pretty good. I will come down here, see that my files are ready to run. I will keep audio enabled here in case I was inside one of the nodes and I wanted to watch a YouTube on something, or I needed to hear something. I'll keep audio enabled here. This adapter part now is where you want to change the settings. So I'm currently looking at NAT. I think that's the default anymore in VirtualBox, and it works just fine. But what we want to do is put everything on its own private little network. So I select internal network, and you remember that the name is cluster server or whatever you named it. And VirtualBox will see that you have created a new internal network name, and it will default to that every time you install something. The default name is int, what is called intnet, I-N-T-N-E-T, but I changed it to cluster server just to make it meaningful to me. I don't care about serial ports. USB is enabled. That's groovy. I don't care about shared or user interface. Click OK. Now this is an ISO we have to install. So I click the run box, and we're going to install this ISO. This is going to go through the same processes that we went through as we did with pfSense, but a little bit differently. First of all, I'm going to hit enter to select graphical install. Now this is very much a very Debian looking like installation process. If you've installed older versions of Ubuntu or something like that, you'll see this menu looks very similar. So once you've done one of these, it's going to be pretty meaningful as you go along and you do others. Now you can see that my mouse cursor has changed to a little tiny black arrow. I will tell you that Debian is really good. I don't need to hit the right control key to get out of Debian like I might have to do in something like a Metasploitable. So you can go in and out, and it resizes the mouse just fine. See how that's working. I'll click continue because I have an English keyboard. It's a United States location. I'm in American English language. And this is what it's going to look like. Now this thing will take quite a little while to install. So we're looking at, maybe 15 minutes by the time it's all said and done installing. So what I'm going to do is pause this video once in a while so that it can go through a process like this and you don't have to see all of the progress bars. So I'm going to put this on hold right now and come back to you. Okay, now this is important. you have to manage the host names on your cluster nodes. You want to name them very precisely. Now in this case, the host name is going to be master node. So I'm going to click in here. See that drag and drop error? We've got to get rid of that. I'm going to click in here and type in master node like that. We have to monitor these host names. This is going to be very important to us as we're working with the cluster. And I'll click continue. I don't have a domain name. If I did, I could put this thing on the domain, but it's fine to just go by it. And now we're going to do some network passwords. Now I'm going to show them in the clear. I'm going to set them, and then I want to show you that you probably want to make these. You would never do this in the real world, like in an enterprise environment, but it's going to make your life a lot easier if you go with a password that you can remember everywhere. And of course, if you were doing this in a production environment like this, you wouldn't do that. You'd have to have some pretty strong passwords. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm making sure that everything is going to be uniform across all of the cluster nodes, because it's going to get intense anyway, and we just don't want to have this getting in our way. Now, it wants to know your username. You can type in your full username if you want. I don't know what happens here if it registers me somewhere. Well, I do know what happens, but this is a different feature of the system. We're just putting in a long name here. You don't have to have it. And then I'm going to go with a short name of just Bill rather than William, because I don't want to type in William all the time. And I'm going to do the same things, guys. I'm going to give the same password to my user account, because we're trying to make sure that we get as much of this stuff out of the way as we can, so that when we are getting these cluster nodes to work together, the idea is that we don't want to have, some sort of a password problem interfering with the process. Okay, I will come back to you in just a minute as we do this progress bar. I'm going to select the mountain time here. Now it went through and it detected the disks that it was going to use, and it comes up with a disk partitioning scheme window here. And you could use LVM Logical Volume Manager. I don't think you need to do that in this case. I'm totally happy with just guided. If you don't know a whole lot about Linux, if you were a Linux expert and you wanted to set up LVM, that would be great, or encrypted LVM, but in this, or even manual. But I'm trusting the process here, so I'm going to click continue. Now it says I'm going to create a file. So Linux is file based, and your hard drive here is going to be called SDA. It lives in the dev folder. It's got a name, and it's going to emulate SCSI, Small Computer Systems Interface. So this is just showing you this is the disk I'm going to create. You click continue. Now it wants to know, should I put some files in one location and some in another? This would be a good idea if this was an enterprise class deployment, but in this case we don't care about it, so I'm going to click continue. I'm just going to let it put all files in one partition. Continue. Now, this is a question here. It's saying I'm going to do this. On your SCSI drive called SDA, this is a file. I'm going to create a primary partition that's using the file system called ext4. Perfect. And it's going to create a swap file, which hopefully we never use. And I'm going to click continue to finish partitioning and write changes. What is a swap file? Well, when you're loading the OS and it's got a bunch of stuff in memory, and it's like, oh, I've got more stuff than I've got memory, what it will do is it will start swapping out to the hard drive, and the hard drive is extensively slower than random access memory, and so we really don't want it to do swapping if we can help it, but we're giving it 1 gig of swap space in case it needs it. Continue. This is an important thing. If you hit continue right now and it's parked on no, it's going to abandon the entire installation process. Okay, have a nice day. So what we have to do is it's making you want to stop and examine what it's saying here. And what we want to do is tell it, yes, I do want to go ahead and work with this. So we'll click continue. And now it's going to take a minute, so I'm going to put you on hold. Now this is a weird little screen. What it's saying is, oh, do you have other software drivers that you need to install? Do you have like a USB, CD-ROM, whatever? We don't have anything, so that's fine. So I'll just say yes and click continue. And then it says the image with the following label has been scanned. That's great. We don't have any extra installation media, so we'll click continue. I'm supposed to say no. That's why I keep coming back to this. Now, you pick your country, United States for me. This is a mirror. A mirror is a place where the software is loaded and it can be downloaded, and I'm just going to go with the default debian.org. I do not have an HTTP proxy. A proxy box is something that sits in your way, and so when you want to go out to the web, it goes out for you, and what it can do is it can cache files that people hit quite often so that it's a little bit faster, and it can do some protective security type measures as well. I don't have a proxy here at home, so I'm just going to go past this, and then it's going to do some more install. I'll put you on hold for just one more minute. Okay, you were probably presented with a screen that I did not show on camera here, but it asks you, do you want to share anonymous information with the Debian people, and it's set to no, which is fine. Now, you can pick your different desktop environments here. You can see that GNOME is selected. I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm going to select XFCE. There's another one that you could try selecting, so you can move back and forth between it. There's one called LXQT, but I think we'll just go with XFCE for now. What's great about this is you can enable all of these desktop environments, and then you can practice switching between them. You have to use the terminal command to do that, but you can practice switching between them to see what the different ones look like and what you like about each one. In this case, since we're using a cluster server node, we want this to be as small and quick as possible. We also want to enable SSH server so that because we're going to use SSH to communicate across the nodes. Click continue. Okay, now what you're faced with here is telling you that it's going to install Grub, the Grub bootloader. This is the default bootloader for quite a bit of Linux. It's fine, so we'll just click continue. Next thing we have to do is we have to select the device on which we're going to install the bootloader. So we will select this device here. Now it says dev SDA. I want you to pay attention to that, because there is a folder inside your Linux distro once you get it installed that's called dev. It's a directory called dev, and it stands for devices. And inside dev is going to be a file that describes your hard drive here in your VM. It's called SDA, Sam Delta. Alright, so we'll click continue. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Okay, now we have to reboot the computer. So this is the final step. We click continue, and once it's booting, we'll get into that and take a little quick look at it, and then we'll stop the movie for today. First thing you're going to run into is this screen here. You just hit enter to tell it to boot to Debian Linux. I'm going to bring this window up and resize it a little bit so it's a little bit easier for you to see here. Just like that. This is a completely normal boot. You should watch the screen and see what it's telling you. It goes really fast. If everything's normal, what happens is the GUI opens up, and this is what it looks like. So I will enter in here. My name is, as you saw there, and I'll put in my password. And we're going to be into our default Debian 12, and this guy is called master node. So this is the XFCE framework here. Looks great, nothing wrong here. And I think that will be it. So when we get together next time, what we'll do is we'll talk about how to configure these things. Your homework now is you want to do 2 more of these. So but when we get together for the next video, you want to have 2 more nodes. You're going to label one node compute node 1, make it all one word, all lowercase, compute node 1, and another one called compute node 2. So there will be 3 Debian 12 VMs inside your folder alongside pfSense. And then next time we get back together, we will look at how to configure these nodes so that they can work together with one another. So thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this movie. If you like what I'm doing here, please encourage others to like and subscribe to my channel. You're welcome to drop comments to me. I really enjoy looking at your comments, responding to them. I'm trying to grow the channel, so if you could help me, I would really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you on the flip side. Have a great day.